I used to be afraid of death and I used to be afraid of poverty. But greatest of all, I used to be afraid of getting old age. I was somebody that was very, very, very careful of old age because I used to think getting old is not good. Getting old is is something I cannot do. I was afraid of old age and dying. I was afraid of, you know, a lot of things like getting old was the greatest fear. Those days they will tell you a fool at 40 is a fool forever. And it was popular, just like the word that said a jack of all trade is a master of none. Actually, I was so afraid of being old until I read a book. It was a book that changed everything for me. The name of that book is Your Magic Power to Be Rich. Is a compendium, or it's three books in one. Your Magic Power to Be Rich by Napoleon Hill. And when I opened the book, the first book inside the three in one book was Think and Grow Rich. That was my second time reading Think and Grow Rich. I read Think and Grow Rich when I was younger, and I started reading the book. As I read the book, this is the power of knowledge now. As I read the book, at some point in the book, I finished that one, entered the second book in the series, and he was talking about fear. A particular chapter was dedicated to fear, and they started dealing with my fear of old age. And that was when I realized that a man's life actually begins at the age of 40. Yes. He talked about fear of old age, fear of poverty, and fear of death. One of the most things that cripples African young people that they don't rise is fear. Fear can cripple you to the point that you don't want to invest your money in anything because you're afraid. I've seen somebody, there is a man I know. He's been married for so many years, no child, and he didn't want to adopt a child, or neither does he want to do IVF and all those things. He said his faith is against adoption, IVF, and all those things. Now they are very old. And one day he was building a very massive residential house in a commercial environment. And we were in a discussion. I asked him, I said, why not make this thing a plaza so that people can come here and rent these things? This is a commercial environment. Why are you building residential house in the middle of a market? This is almost the middle of a market. And he said something. He said, who am I building it for? If I die today, who will inherit it? So I died today and somebody will inherit all this wealth. And that thing struck me. And I remember the day I read this book. And Napoleon Hill was talking about the fear of old age. Let me touch on that. Fear of getting old. And he said, a man's life begins at 40. That throughout a man's life, many times in their 20s and 25s and 30s, they are still trying to figure it out. They are figuring things out. They are testing things out. They are failing and failing and failing as much as they can. A man's life starts taking shape from the age of 40. Once you get to 40, by then you have failed so much that you now know how not to fail. For example, the guy that invented the light bulb, Thomas Edison. One day he was in an interview and they asked him, sir, how were you able to keep going after you failed 1,000 times to invent the light bulb? And he said, actually, I did not fail. Each time it did not work, I learned a new way how not to make a light bulb. And that is how a man's life is supposed to be. Many men out there are afraid of failure. Many men out there are afraid that they are failing, that they are not the fear of old age, the fear of failing. No, fail. Failure is part of growth. Fail if you're smart, fail as many times as possible in before you get to 40. Do you know why they say a fool at 40 is a fool for life? Because a man at 40 must have discovered what does not work and now is focusing his energy on what works. Yes. Even if it's in relationship, you have dated till you are 40. By the time you're 40, you are already a professor of dating because you now know what doesn't work in relationship. So instead of being afraid that you're getting old, now I'm getting to 40, especially for the men. I'm not talking about the women right now. I'm talking about the men. That I'm getting to 40 and what will I do with my life? No, calm down, fail again, fail again, fail again. Every failure is supposed to be a building block to your next level. The men that refuses to fail before they get to 40 are the men that will finally fail at 40. They call it midlife crisis. Yeah, it became popular in the early 90s, midlife crisis. When a man that is doing well gets to 40, it's as if everything falls apart. Actually, the reason why everything falls apart when the man gets to 40 is because actually the man have not been trying and failing. Fail again. Fail faster than any other person around you. When you look around you and in your circle, nobody is failing. That means nobody is trying. Leave that circle. It takes a man that is trying to fail. Life teaches failure in everything. You used to be an infant and you started crawling. From crawling with your belly, you started crawling with your knees and your two hands on the ground. And all of a sudden you started walking. The first time you walked, you wanted to run to daddy, you fell, broke your nose, and they brushed you, treated you. Tomorrow you stood again and you rushed to daddy again and failed again. You failed and failed and failed and failed until you started walking and running. And today you have two legs and two hands that are functioning properly. What if you said, since I failed getting up the first time, I broke my nose, I will not walk again throughout my life? You'll be crawling by now. But we don't learn from nature. We don't learn from life in general. What we want to do with our life is that when we fail in a business, enter another, fail again, fail again. In fact, fail 7 times in the same business before you can change into a new business and fail 7 times again. That means try out new things every year, at least 7 new things inside that business. See the one that succeeds. Failure is good because failure is the only pathway to success. There are 2 reasons why people don't learn with their failure. There are 2 reasons why when people fail, they stay down. Number 1, is the failure to learn from your failure makes you a failure. You are not a failure because you fail. You're a failure because you're failing at the same thing, in the same reasons. You're giving the same reasons for your failure over and over and over again. No, failure should be when you fail. You expected to fail again, but not with the same reason of failure. So, I'm inviting every one of you. Let's fail together. Let's fail. You don't want to be a fool at 40. Fail now, because every failure provides you with a gem of wisdom. You want to be wise, fail, because it's in your failure that you learn wisdom. You can never become wise not failing. You can't. So you want to be wise. You want to be like the wisest man in the world. One of my mentees came to me one day and said, "Sir, I want to be wise. I'm asking God for the spirit of wisdom." I said, after you finish asking God for the spirit of wisdom, come, let me teach you other things to do. Because when you really, really ask God for the spirit of wisdom, He is going to give you an instruction. He will give you a spirit that wants to try, fail, and try again. Solomon did not become wise because one spirit entered him. No, he became wise because he learned from his father, tested out the things he learned and failed. He learned to womanize him from the father, tested out to womanizing and failed. And in the book of Ecclesiastes, he summed up every of his adventures and called it vanity. You cannot call something vanity that you have not entered into and failed in. Solomon is qualified to call relationship vanity because he married 700 wives and other concubines. Solomon was supposed to call wealth vanity because he became, in his days, gold were as easy to get as dust. In his days, gold was just there for everybody. So Solomon is supposed to be the man that will tell you that wealth is vanity, marriage, relationship is vanity, everything is vanity. Because of what? He failed a lot of times and he rose again in his failure. And after that, in the book of Ecclesiastes, which when he now became the teacher, the preacher, he now told you, I have tested and failed in every of these things, and I can tell you that they are vanity. You cannot call something vanity that you have not failed in. Fail, learn, fail again, learn again, fail again, learn again. At every time you fail and learn, you're not falling backward, you're falling forward. Yes, even though you're falling, you will get to your destination. That's the thing. Fail forward. And the only way to fail forward is to learn as you're failing. Don't repeat your failure in the same thing. Fail in one thing today, tomorrow fail in another. Learn from your last year's failure and fail in something new tomorrow. As you're failing, you're growing. Yes. Number 2 is the fear. It's fear. Fear makes you a coward. You want to be a coward? Every coward is a fearful somebody. Yeah. They die 1,000 times. A coward dies 1,000 times. So if you want to be wise, you must kill fear.